Welcome to RHI's Sociable City Interviews, where we meet with global thought leaders on nightlife and the social economy. Today, we are joined by Greg Mullen, an accomplished senior executive with more than 30 years' experience in government leadership, law enforcement, operations management, and higher education, serving as Associate Vice President for Public Safety at Clemson University and over a decade as the Charleston, South Carolina Chief of Police. He is also co-author of RHI's Public Safety and Policing Nightlife District Guide, presented in both English and Spanish, and distributed through North, Central, and South America.
Well, Chief Mullen, it's so great to see you. It's great to see the background of your lovely new home that you've been living in there for a while. I'm happy that you're able to join me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Jim. It's great to reconnect with you.
Yeah. As I say in the introduction, you had a number of different roles, including chief from Charleston and then in public safety with Clemson University. So you bring a really unique mix of backgrounds. And the first question I want to ask, because this comes up sometimes, is what's the different role of a police chief versus a public safety director? How do you see those two functions within a city, or like in your case, within the university? But how do you see police fit into a public safety function?
Well, one of the things that was really important for me at Clemson as the public safety director was that I had multiple agencies that clearly were really important to work together. And so I had police, fire, emergency management, and physical security. So all of those entities were working together. So by having the opportunity to have all of those different agencies under one umbrella, the integration and the leveraging of resources was a lot more robust, because obviously as that public safety director, you had a lot of direct influence and a lot of direct oversight on those different agencies. So it was a lot easier to bring them together and have everybody working towards a single purpose. Whereas as a police chief, obviously you've got to focus on the law enforcement aspect of what you're leading, and then trying to create as much influence as possible with other agencies. So while they both work really well together, I think the fact that with the public safety director position, you've got the ability to bring together a lot more people with direct connection from your leadership or for the purpose that you've laid out for that organization, compared to when you're a police chief, you're just focusing on generally the one organization, and then you're able to build influence with others. So that's really the difference that I saw. And in reality, all of those things work together. So it's just a matter of what direct leadership responsibility that I had compared to when I was a police chief. It was more about building collaboration, influence, and bringing in different entities to work together.
Mm-hmm. So one, it was really much more of a structure that existed. The other, you had to create that structure and constantly monitor it and make it work.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah, yeah. Now I know. I mean, we're here to talk about a lot of your work in Charleston, because you really were an innovator in the approaches that you took in policing your that King Street area, which had a large density of social venues, as we call them, and that led to a lot of challenges for you and your officers, particularly at closing time. And I think you got the insight that some of the problems were not so much the way in which you police the area, but rather how the decisions were made to allow that kind of density of venues with the infrastructure that was there, so that you had too many people at any one time. And that kind of led you to think differently about how to consider occupancy as a safety factor and as also part of a planning strategy. So I know that's something that you had some insights on. I just want to know how you took that, and how you would advise other cities to stop thinking about just the number of venues, but rather the numbers of people in terms of determining how many venues you want to have in a particular area.
Right. So one of the things that we realized specifically around 2007, when all the economic recession took place, the downtown area really faced some difficulties, because a lot of retail stores closed. They just weren't able to survive. And when it started to come back, what happened was the hospitality industry was what was really driving the downtown or the nightlife district, because lot of restaurants, a lot of bars, a lot of clubs started to come back into the King Street area. And as that happened, there was no code enforcement, or there was no zoning requirements that said how many bars or how many nightclubs or how many restaurants that turned into nightclubs could be within a single block face. So what we did is we started to look at that and see, as the clubs closed at 2 o'clock in the morning, it was just a huge influx of people that were coming out of these clubs. They were coming onto the sidewalks that had not been built to manage this number of people. So as we started to kind of consider, what were we really dealing with? We weren't dealing with a single club or a single night life venue. We were dealing with the entire district. So what we started to do was look at that from a perspective of what was the population that we were dealing with at closing time, because that's when we had most of our significant problems. So we started to look at all the different club venues that were in this small area, and determining what was their maximum capacity. And what we decided, or what we found, was that at closing time, we were dealing with thousands of people, and it was like dealing with a significant event. And that's why it became such a struggle for us to deploy our resources appropriately. So as we started to look at that, we were then able to go back to our planning department, our zoning department, and eventually city council, and get a code that was codified that would only allow so many bars or restaurants or ABC establishments in a single block face, because we didn't want to have excessive occupancy within a single concentrated area. And when we did that, what happened is it started to diffuse some of the issues we were having, because we didn't have this large concentration of people that were dumping out onto the sidewalks at closing time. So it really allowed us to, one, understand better what type of situation we were actually dealing with at closing times. And then we were better able to deploy our resources and not have this huge concentration of people on sidewalks that were not built for that. And then they were spilling out into the streets, which were causing problems with the pedestrians and the vehicle interaction. So by looking at the density, and then looking at the total occupancy, it really gave us a better understanding of what we were really dealing with in terms of the numbers of people. And therefore, we were able to then go back to city council and get some additional resources to put down into the area, so that we could better manage that, and not so much control it, because it was just, you're not going to control those areas because there's so many different variables. But we wanted to create order and manage the area so that it would be safe and secure, and viable and livable for everybody that not only was in that area, but also the neighborhoods around it.
Now, I know along those lines, with the limited infrastructure that you had and the resources that you had available, clearly one of the issues at closing time was just that was the beginning of the Uber and the Lyft and the taxis, and you had those horse-drawn carriages, and you had more bicycles. And I remember the challenges that you faced were people who parked their bicycles on the sidewalk and they fell, and that created lots of congestion. And then also the pickup and drop off in the concentrated area. So I think you worked on some kind of a mobility plan, trying to manage where people could get their rides and where they could better store their bikes and other things that were really, I think, pretty strategic in what you did. Can you explain that approach and what you did to manage that closing time traffic congestion, which really hinders the disbursement of the crowds?
Sure. One of the things that we saw, again, as we were assessing the growth of this area, because it was really growing significantly, because as Charleston came back, we were designated as the #1 tourist destination in the world, and then in the United States for multiple years. So it really started to draw a lot and lots of people to the area. So obviously the vehicle traffic with the ride shares and then people riding bikes became a significant issue. So again, we took a strategic look at that and decided that what we would do is take some of our loading zones, if you will, or some of the areas on our streets that were not being used as effectively as possible, and strategically place bike racks in those areas, because we wanted people to ride bikes, because it really kind of cut down on some of the traffic, but we wanted them to be placed in a safe place and not inhibit the sidewalks, because what would happen is people would put them on signposts or anywhere they could lock them up, and then they would fall onto the sidewalk and become a pedestrian hazard. So we strategically located these bike racks throughout the district. And then we also put in requirements where the ride shares had to drop off on the side streets, because what was occurring was they would just stop in front of any establishment, and then the traffic would back up, and that would just create more of an issue. It cause frustration and just create the intensity and the emotional heights of people in that area. So when we started to pick up and drop off in designated areas on the side streets, that allowed us to maintain that through flow of traffic, and we weren't allowing those emotions to get as high as they had at one time. And it just provided for a much more organized situation. And it also allowed us to increase the safety in that area, because those designated areas, we generally would have them located near where we had police officers, or where we would actually park police cars during the late night hours. We had cameras near those locations. So we really tried to make sure that it was a place, one, that people would know exactly where to go if they wanted to find a cab or a ride share, or if they wanted to make sure that they were, going to a safe place. So all of those things factored into what we were trying to accomplish with this mobility plan that really allowed us to manage, again, another element that is kind of a single element, but all of these things integrate together to make sure that you're operating your nightlife district in the most efficient and effective way. Because a lot of times what happens is we look at those things in silos, but as we learned with your help, is that all of these things, I mean, as small as figuring out how people are going to manage their garbage and how they're going to put out trash cans on the sidewalks, or what time they're going to put out trash cans on the sidewalk, all of these things factor into, one, whether your location is going to be safe and it's going to be livable, it's going to be clean, and whether or not it just looks like it's in shambles. So all of these things are important as you're looking at how you manage your overall nightlife district. It has to be a plan that integrates all of these different pieces, and there has to be a lot of different players involved as well.
One of the things I think you're most noted for in your role with the police, and I've spent time with the people who worked for you, your lieutenants, sergeants, officers, they respected you highly, and it seems like you gave them great confidence in their work. But it seems too that you understood the strategic importance of putting certain officers in situations that are more relevant to their personal backgrounds. I know that within the gay community, you had some gay officers, so you integrated them into that community so that you built up trust. I know within the residential community, you had officers that would come more from that residential area, that people could relate to them more. And in the nightlife districts, you obviously had to have certain officers who were able to deal with a lot of these conflicts without generating conflicts in and of themselves. And it seems to me like you had some good ways of doing that. Plus, I know that you had a combination of, there's always the different ways in which officers can move. They could walk on the beat, they could ride bikes or segways, they could ride motorcycles, they could ride horses, they could ride cars. So, as a chief, and you have all of these resources and you have these crowds, and you have obviously a certain percentage of those people intoxicated, many of them are young adults who have some issues of control. Um, what are the key variables or factors that you have to consider as a chief, or at least working with your command staff to figure out the best ways in which to put the right officers, and what kind of training or support do officers need to work in these highly charged districts?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is look at the geographic layout of the area that you're trying to manage. Obviously, depending upon the size and the scope of what you're trying to do, has a lot to do with what deployment methods you will use. For instance, when I was in Virginia Beach, we had a large area that we had to deal with. So we had motorcycles that were a part of our strategic deployment. And they were basically on the outer perimeter of the area, so they could make sure that when the parking lots were secure and there was not people lurking around in those areas that would create problems or commit crime. So that was one area. Now in Charleston, the area was a little bit more confined. So basically there, what we did is we utilized bicycles, we utilized foot patrols, we utilized horses for a while. When we had the economic downturn, we had to look at that and make some decisions, and we didn't have our horses after that. And then we obviously have some vehicles that were there that would allow us to move around quickly depending upon what we needed to do, or transport people that had been arrested. So the other good thing about vehicles is that they can be strategically located throughout the area, and then with their halo lights, they're very highly visible. So you don't get this feeling of a police state, but you know that there are police around because you can see those lights, and then you integrate the bicycles and the foot patrols. Now, for me, I always liked bicycles and foot patrols most. The foot patrols, people just got to know the operators better. They were just in the same areas. They really worked to build the trust and the relationships with those individuals that they were engaging with in many cases on a nightly basis. And then the bicycles clearly gave you some mobility. They were they were able to move quickly within that area. And again, at closing time, they could also stop and become a supplemental support system if there was a large crowd that needed to be dispersed or needed to be monitored as they were leaving. And then they could hop back on their bikes and they could continue their patrolling around the entire area. So that really gave you a lot of flexibility. In terms of actually identifying officers, I believe the key there is that just like when you're looking for officers that are going to be working in any community, you want people that are going to be able to relate. You want them to be able to communicate. You want them to build relationships. So those are the types of officers that we look for to operate in the nightlife areas. Because what we wanted there is we wanted people that were smart. We wanted them to be able to talk with the operators. We wanted them to be able to identify problems and proactively go out and try to prevent things from happening through those relationships, through things they actually observed, bringing those ideas back to us so that we could either tweak what we were doing or in some cases implement completely new programs that would help us to prevent problems, because that's what you want to happen in your nightlife districts. You want to prevent as many problems as possible through education, through building those relationships, through working together with multiple entities within your city, public safety, planning, zoning, traffic and transportation, working with all of those folks to identify and solve problems, and then clearly providing as much support as you can to the operators so that they can operate effectively, they can operate safely, and they can operate in a way that they're going to make the economic outcomes that they're looking for. And that way everybody wins. And at the same time, however, you have to have officers that are willing, that when required, they need to be able to deal with dangerous situations or crimes in progress. And once that's over with, to de-escalate very quickly, get things back to the calm nature that we want them, so that we don't create a spectacle, or we don't create unnecessary fear. And we certainly don't want to create unnecessary news that would be a negative opportunity for our reputation or for the economic viability of the community. So the officers that are working in these areas have to understand that they are a significant part of the success of that area, and whatever they do could either be a really important part of helping it succeed, or it could be a very negative outcome based on their actions. So that's what I always looked for. Obviously, we kept people trained. We would give them specific information about alcohol establishments. We would look at clearly de-escalation. We would look at how you deal with people that are intoxicated or under the influence of other types of substances. So all those things were regularly provided to the officers that worked in those areas, so that they would be as much as possible, they would be able to deal with any situation that they found themselves encountering, which was going to be a little different because every weekend you're dealing with a different group. It's not like if you're in a community, you get to know those people very, very, very closely. In this scenario, you're dealing with people that are completely different. They've come to Charleston or Virginia Beach or wherever they're going to have a great time. And in a lot of places, their inhibitions are not where they would normally be. So you've got to understand that and certainly balance that fun. People want to have fun. And then at the same time, we want to make sure that people are safe and secure.
Mhm. Now, I mean, obviously, the final piece of this puzzle is the operators themselves. And, they range from those that, always follow rules and are always committed to the community and they always want to help. And then you have those who basically are unresponsive to any kinds of feedback and restrictions, and in fact, sometimes see the police and the city as antagonistic to them. So how do you navigate through all of those different types of business operators, and how do you get them to cooperate with each other? Because ultimately, they have to work as a unit rather than as individual operators.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was most successful for my teams was that we were very open and transparent with the operators. We shared information with them. We shared education with them in terms of what we were going to be looking for, what our expectations were. And then at the same time, we shared with them what they could expect from us. We wanted them to be sharing information with us if there were things that we were doing or individual officers were doing that we could do differently or do better. We wanted to hear from them. We had regular meetings with the operators, and it was not always somebody's done something wrong. And I think that's probably the biggest piece of suggestion that I would add here is that the key to creating the trust and connection is really to build that while there is not crisis. It's just like anything else. If you're going to an operator when something really negative has happened at their establishment or something's really happened negatively in the entire district, and you're going to start talking about what people haven't or have not done that could have maybe prevented that or maybe even caused it. That's not really when you want to have that opportunity to create a relationship. We want to have that relationship built so when those crises do happen, we can go in, we can talk about things, we can talk about them without a whole lot of emotion, and that we can actually find solutions that will allow us to move forward. And what I think happens in those areas is that once you create this transparency and you create this trust and respect, and you work with them to help them when they have issues, then they start to see that you're not there as their enemy. You're there actually as a person who wants to help them. And even when they make mistakes, it's important that we don't come down and cut their legs out from under them, that we go in and we talk about what happened. We certainly give them some information about how they can do better. And at the same time, we hold them accountable. If the problem continues, then we have to take action. But if we've taken the steps along the way to educate them, to build that trust and connection, to help them to be successful, then when we have those situations where we have to take action, what I have found in my experience is there's a lot more understanding, and it's a lot easier for us to recover from that and move forward instead of being stuck in this situation where we become us against them. And for me, that's what I really tried to do, is to create that relationship so it was not an us against them. And at the same time, everyone understood that we all had a job to do. So we weren't going to overlook things. We weren't going to let people get away with things that were unsafe or against the law. But at the same time, if we could work through them and find a solution that didn't require an enforcement action the first or second time, maybe, then we would try to do that. But again, understanding that we were not going to allow things to happen and not take action to address them.
Wow, this has been great, Chief Mullen or Greg. This has been a wonderful kind of lesson in policing from all different angles and perspectives. It's no wonder that you earn such respect where whatever you did and wherever you've been. So I appreciate your time on this. And is there any concluding comments or messages you want to send or advice that you want to send to people who are trying to figure this stuff out?
Well, I would just say this. I've been in 3 different places around nightlife districts. And what I have always kind of found as a theme is that there is there's always going to be some contention between the police and the nightlife operators. There's always going to be contention between nightlife operators and neighborhoods if they're co-located. So what I would say is that as a city or as a town or as an area, the thing that we have to realize is that we all depend on one another, because a lot of the economic value and a lot of the growth that comes out of the nightlife districts allow other parts of the city, as well as the police department and other departments in the city, to be supported because of that economic impact. So we all need to work together. We all need to figure out how we can balance those things of having a really vibrant and economically viable nightlife area, and at the same time have a great quality of life for all the people that live in that community. And if we can do that, then we've all been successful.
Great job, Greg. I really appreciate it, and I wish you luck in your new ventures, and I hope we'll be able to work together again soon.
Excellent, Jim. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay.